The rancher saved the Apache woman from the deadly cold, and the chief's question changed everything. Snow blanketed the ground, turning everything into a landscape of white and gray. The trees were bare, their branches etched against the sky like black lines on paper. The ranch looked almost deserted, with the usual sounds of life: birds chirping, cows lowing, the creek flowing, silenced under the weight of the snow and the stillness of the season. John Whitaker had been a rancher all his life. He knew the land like the back of his hand, having spent decades raising cattle, tending horses, and maintaining the fences that kept his small herd safe. Yet, even with all his experience, winter always brought its own dangers. Animals struggled to find food, and humans had to be careful with frostbite and hypothermia. But John was used to hard work and long days. He had learned patience and vigilance from his father and grandfather, and he carried those lessons forward like a badge of honor. That morning, he wrapped a thick wool scarf around his neck and pulled on his worn leather gloves. The wind blew across the prairie, and he felt the sting of cold on his cheeks. He had been planning to check the northern fences and make sure his cattle were safe, as a sudden snowstorm had hit overnight. With his horse, Dusty, he rode slowly across the white expanse, keeping his eyes open for any sign of trouble. His breath rose in clouds, each puff freezing almost instantly in the frigid air. As he crested a small hill, he noticed something unusual. At first, it was just a dark shape against the white snow, almost blending in with the rocks and frozen shrubs. But as he rode closer, he realized it was a person, a young woman, stumbling weakly, her body bent against the wind. She was wrapped in thin clothing that was clearly not enough for this weather. Her movements were slow and shaky, and she seemed barely able to stay on her feet. John's heart skipped a beat. It was rare to see anyone out here in this kind of weather, especially someone so clearly in trouble. He urged Dusty forward gently, careful not to startle her, and called out in a firm, calm voice, "Hey, are you all right? Can you stand?" The woman looked up, her face pale and her lips blue from the cold. Her eyes, wide with fear, met his. She tried to speak, but only a faint whisper came out. The wind carried her words away before they could reach him. John didn't hesitate. He dismounted quickly, leaving Dusty tied to a nearby fence post. He ran to her side, reaching out to steady her as she swayed on the icy ground. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'm here to help. You're going to be all right." She tried to nod, but her strength was fading fast. Her fingers were stiff and numb, and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. John could see the signs of severe cold exposure. She needed warmth immediately, or she might not survive much longer in the open snow. He gently lifted her into his arms, careful not to jostle her too much. She was light, almost frail, and he realized she must have been walking for hours, or maybe even days, through this freezing wilderness. The wind whipped at them and snow swirled around like a storm, but John didn't falter. He held her close, pressing his coat around her as they hurried back to the ranch house. Every step across the icy ground was difficult, but he focused only on getting her to safety. When they reached the cabin, John pushed open the heavy wooden door and carried her inside. The warmth hit her immediately, and she shivered less as he laid her down near the fireplace. Flames flickered in the hearth, casting a golden glow across the room. John removed her wet clothing carefully, replacing them with thick blankets and a heavy coat from his own supplies. He moved slowly, mindful not to scare her, speaking softly the whole time. "Just stay still," he said. "You're safe now. I'll take care of you." He fetched a bowl of warm water and dampened a cloth, gently wiping the snow and ice from her face and hands. The small gestures, simple as they were, seemed to bring her a little comfort. John worked methodically, wrapping her in layers and checking her pulse and breathing. He had learned these skills from necessity. Years of tending animals and living in the harsh plains had taught him how to respond when someone or something was in danger. Hours passed, and she began to regain some strength. Her eyes fluttered open from time to time, and she gave him a faint, grateful look. John noticed her dark hair, tangled and wet, and the striking shape of her features. He didn't know much about her, only that she was in desperate need of care. For now, he focused on the essentials: warmth, food, and rest. He brought her a small bowl of broth, heated carefully over the fire. She sipped it slowly, shivering but beginning to gain energy. John watched her carefully, never leaving her side. As she ate, he tried to make her feel comfortable, telling her about the ranch, the animals, and the weather outside. Though they could barely understand each other at first, his gentle tone seemed to calm her. She responded with nods, gestures, and quiet sounds, and slowly a fragile trust began to form. Night fell, and the storm outside raged on. The wind howled through the cracks of the cabin, rattling the windows and shaking the doors. Inside, the fire crackled, filling the room with warmth and a sense of safety. John sat nearby, keeping watch as the woman slept under the blankets. He knew the night could still be dangerous. Cold nights could bring frostbite or other complications. But for now, she was alive, and that was what mattered most. By morning, the storm had lessened, leaving a quiet, white world outside. John checked on her again. She had slept through most of the night, and her color had improved slightly. She looked at him with eyes that held questions and fear, but also a hint of relief. He realized that their meeting, though unexpected and born of necessity, had already created a bond of human connection. John knew that soon, she might need more than just his care. She must have a family or a tribe, someone looking for her. But for now, the priority was survival. He made a plan. He would nurse her back to full strength and then help her reunite with whoever she belonged to. There was no rush, no judgment, just the quiet determination to do what was right. As the day went on, John worked tirelessly, fetching firewood, preparing food, and making sure she was comfortable. She started to speak a few words, pointing to objects or mimicking actions. Though he didn't understand the language, he could tell she was trying to communicate. Patience, he knew, would be the bridge between them, and he had plenty of that. By the evening, she could sit up on her own, and John felt a cautious sense of hope. The young woman was no longer on the edge of death. He had saved her from the deadly cold, but he also knew that the story was just beginning. There were questions to be answered, connections to be made, and a path forward that neither of them could yet see. For John, this was more than just an act of kindness. It was a reminder of the fragile, precious nature of life, and how courage and compassion could make a real difference. That night, as he watched her sleep peacefully by the fire, John reflected on the unexpected turn of events. A simple ride across the snowy plains had turned into a life-saving mission. And he couldn't help but wonder about the people she belonged to, the world she had come from, and what the future might hold. In the quiet warmth of the cabin, amidst the crackling fire and the soft snow falling outside, a new story had begun. A story that would change both of their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The days after the rescue were quiet but filled with small, meaningful moments. John Whittaker continued his routine on the ranch, but everything had changed slightly since he had found the young woman in the snow. He no longer felt the emptiness of the winter plains in the same way. Now there was a presence in the cabin that demanded attention, care, and patience. The young woman, whom John had learned was named Ahia, was slowly regaining her strength. She had a quiet resilience, a determination to survive that John admired deeply. Each day, she could sit longer without shivering, eat more of the food he prepared, and even move around the cabin with less effort. John watched her carefully, knowing that patience and consistency were just as important as warmth and nourishment. At first, communication between them was nearly impossible. Ahia spoke little English, and John knew almost nothing of her language. But the human spirit has its own way of bridging gaps. He would point to objects, repeat simple words, and use gestures to convey meaning. She would nod, smile faintly, or mimic his actions. It was slow, but progress was steady. John found himself fascinated by the way she observed everything, how her eyes took in every detail, the flicker of the fire, the shadows in the corners of the room, the patterns of snowflakes drifting past the window. John realized that she was not just physically fragile after the cold, but also wary. She had been alone in a harsh environment, vulnerable to the dangers of nature, and perhaps people as well. Trust, he understood, could not be rushed. So he spoke gently, moved slowly, and always respected her space. Even a small smile from her felt like a victory, a tiny signal that she was beginning to feel safe. As the days passed, John also began teaching her small skills necessary for life in the cabin and on the ranch. He showed her how to light the fire safely, how to prepare simple meals, and how to care for the animals. She learned quickly, observing carefully and repeating his actions with careful precision. It was a quiet, almost unspoken partnership, with each learning from the other in a way that words could not fully express. One afternoon, as the snow fell gently outside, John noticed Ahia staring at the herd of cattle in the distance. She tilted her head, her eyes bright with curiosity, and mimicked the sound of the cows, surprising John with her keen sense of observation. It was in that moment that he realized she had lived close to nature her whole life, perhaps moving with her people across the plains or mountains, familiar with animals, plants, and the land in ways he had never considered. She had skills he could never have taught her, and he felt a quiet respect for her experience. Despite the growing comfort and trust between them, John could see the pain and uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. She sometimes woke in the middle of the night, shivering despite the blankets whispering words that he could not understand. He would sit by her side, offering warmth and quiet reassurances, and she would eventually relax, leaning against him with a silent acceptance of safety. These moments, John realized, were as important as food or warmth. They were about healing the spirit as well as the body. One morning, he noticed her staring at the horizon through the frost-covered window. Her expression was distant, thoughtful, almost melancholic. John approached gently. "Do you miss your home?" he asked softly, though he knew she might not understand the words. She nodded slightly and then reached for a small bundle hidden under her blanket. She untied it carefully, revealing a few personal items, pieces of fabric, a small carved figure, and a feather. John could see the care with which she handled them. They were precious to her, reminders of her family, her tribe, and the life she had been forced to leave behind in the cold. John handled the items with respect, never prying, but he understood. He had grown up on this land, but he too had memories and treasures from his past that gave him strength. He began to see Ahia not just as a person in need, but as someone with a story, a history, and a life that deserved recognition and care. He started to ask himself questions he had never considered before, questions about identity, survival, and the meaning of kindness across the boundaries of culture and language. Over the next few days, John noticed that Ahia was growing stronger. She could now stand and walk without help, though she still moved cautiously, aware of the unfamiliar surroundings. John found small ways to encourage her independence. He showed her the best spots to gather wood, how to check the animals for signs of illness, and even how to read the weather by watching the clouds and the wind. She absorbed it all quickly, often surprising him with her cleverness and intuition. The ranch work also became a shared experience. John taught her how to feed the animals, mend fences, and handle simple tools safely. She took to these tasks with a quiet determination, often finishing before he expected. John felt a growing admiration for her strength and adaptability. Despite all she had endured, she was learning, contributing, and beginning to reclaim a sense of normalcy. One evening, as they both sat by the fire after a long day, John noticed that Ahia was smiling for the first time without hesitation. She used gestures to show him how she remembered certain animals' names and how she had noticed patterns in the snow that predicted weather changes. It was a simple, joyful moment, but for John, it carried a deep significance. The human connection, he realized, was slowly overcoming fear and mistrust. John also began to reflect on his own life during these days. He had spent years working the land, alone at times, and had never felt the same sense of purpose he now felt while caring for Ahia. The experience was teaching him patience, empathy, and the quiet strength of watching someone grow and heal. Every small step she took toward recovery felt like a shared victory, a reminder that life could be fragile but also resilient. The routine of the cabin created a rhythm for them both. Mornings were for chores and learning, afternoons for tending the fire, preparing food and caring for the animals, and evenings for quiet reflection and conversation in gestures or broken words. John began keeping a small notebook, drawing pictures and writing simple phrases to help Ahia understand and communicate. She responded with drawings of her own, sometimes showing animals, the land, or the people she missed. The exchange was slow but meaningful, creating a bridge of understanding that went beyond language. One day, John decided to take a risk. He led Ahia outside for the first time since her rescue, helping her walk carefully through the snow. The cold bit at their faces, but the fresh air seemed to invigorate her. She laughed softly for the first time, a sound that warmed John's heart as much as any fire could. She explored cautiously, touching the snow, examining the trees, and watching the cattle move across the plains. John watched her, realizing how much the world outside meant to her, and how much she had endured to survive in it. During these walks, he also began teaching her simple words in English, showing her objects, actions, and the names of animals. Ahia repeated them slowly, her pronunciation tentative but determined. John encouraged her, praising each small success. He also tried to learn words from her language, wanting to show respect and make communication easier. It was slow, but over time, they both learned the value of patience, curiosity, and mutual respect. As the weeks passed, John realized that Ahia's recovery was nearly complete. She could walk, eat, and care for herself independently, though she still relied on his guidance and the safety of the cabin. He could see in her eyes a growing confidence and a deepening trust. She was no longer the frightened, fragile figure he had found in the snow. She was becoming herself again, strong and aware, yet still grateful for the help that had saved her life. And through it all, John could not ignore the thought that soon, her family or tribe would be searching for her. He knew that the time would come when she would have to leave the safety of the cabin and return to her people. He also knew that when that time came, he wanted the transition to be peaceful, respectful, and full of understanding. But for now, he focused on the present, on healing, trust, and the small joys of life regained after near tragedy. John and Ahia's days became filled with small victories, moments of laughter, and the quiet understanding that humans could care for one another across barriers of language, culture, and circumstance. Each day brought new lessons, new discoveries, and new bonds that grew stronger in the warmth of the cabin and the cold of the surrounding plains. For John, it was a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, compassion and courage could create hope and connection. And for Ahia, it was a chance to survive, learn, and begin the long journey back to her own people, carrying with her the memory of kindness and humanity she had found in a stranger. By the end of the second month, Ahia was fully recovered. She could move with ease, help with the ranch work, and even enjoy moments of quiet play and observation of the animals. John knew that the next challenge, the reunion with her tribe, would be coming soon, but for now he savored the quiet days of trust, learning, and mutual respect that had grown between them. It was a unique and fragile peace, built slowly, carefully, and with great care. The crisp air of early morning carried with it a sense of change. John Whitaker sensed it even before he noticed the distant dust clouds rising on the horizon. He had grown used to the quiet rhythm of life on the ranch, especially during winter when few travelers ventured across the snow-covered plains. But this morning, something was different. There was a subtle energy in the wind, a feeling that events were about to shift in ways he could not yet predict. As he tended the animals, feeding the cattle and checking the fences, he noticed movement near the tree line. At first it seemed like a group of riders, small, cautious, and deliberate. He squinted through the early morning light, watching as the figures drew closer. There were horses, adorned simply, and people riding with a sense of purpose. John immediately recognized that they were not local settlers. The way they rode, their posture, and even the patterns of their clothing suggested they were from the nearby Apache tribe. A mixture of curiosity and caution filled John. He had grown up with stories of both conflict and cooperation between settlers and the native people of the plains. While there had been tensions in the past, he also knew that mutual respect and understanding were possible. He immediately thought of Ahia, the young woman he had saved from the deadly cold. He had nursed her back to health, taught her skills to survive in the harsh winter, and watched her grow stronger each day. Now her family or tribe was approaching, and the outcome was uncertain. John quickly went back to the cabin. Ahia was awake, sitting near the fire, and she noticed the change in his expression. Her eyes widened slightly, and she instinctively moved closer to him, as if seeking reassurance. He knelt beside her and spoke gently, though he doubted she understood all of his words. He used gestures instead, pointing toward the window and then toward the approaching riders. Her gaze followed and she stiffened, clearly recognizing her people. The tribe had arrived. They dismounted their horses at the edge of the clearing, forming a respectful circle near the cabin. John noticed the leader, the chief, standing slightly apart from the others. There was an intensity in his eyes, a quiet authority that commanded attention. He was an older man, with lines etched into his face that spoke of experience, wisdom, and the weight of responsibility. He observed John carefully, his gaze lingering on the man who had taken in his daughter. Tension filled the air. Both sides, John and the tribe, were unsure of each other's intentions. The chief's eyes met John's, and for a moment there was silence. The wind whispered across the snow, and even the animals seemed to sense the weight of the moment. John knew that the next few minutes would determine how this meeting unfolded. He had no desire for conflict. His only goal was to ensure Ahia's safety and her reunion with her family. A young warrior stepped forward, speaking quickly in the Apache language. Ahia responded with words John could not understand, her voice trembling but firm. John watched closely, trying to read the expressions, the gestures, and the subtle cues that would tell him what was being said. It was clear that there had been fear and worry. Ahia's absence had weighed heavily on the tribe, and they had been searching for her. Now they had found her, alive and unharmed, thanks to John. The chief finally stepped forward, his gaze fixed on John. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. Though John could not understand the language fully, the tone, the rhythm, and the intent were unmistakable. The chief was assessing him, measuring his character, and deciding whether John's actions had been genuine or motivated by self-interest. John met the chief's eyes without hesitation. He had nothing to hide. He gestured to Ahia, then to the cabin, then to himself, indicating that he had cared for her and protected her during the harsh winter. The chief paused, considering John's words and gestures. He then asked a question in a measured, thoughtful tone, a question that seemed simple but carried immense weight. Did you save her because you expected something in return, or because it was the right thing to do? John was taken aback for a moment. The question struck him with its depth. He understood immediately that the answer mattered more than anything else. It was not enough that he had helped. His motives were under scrutiny. He looked the chief in the eyes, feeling the seriousness of the moment, and spoke with quiet honesty. "I saved her because no one should die in the cold if I could help. I expected nothing in return. I only wanted her to live." The chief studied John for several long moments, his eyes searching for any hint of deception. Then slowly he nodded. There was a shift in the air, subtle but powerful. The tension eased and the tribe seemed to relax. The chief's body language conveyed approval, recognition, and a willingness to trust. John felt a sense of relief, but also a deep respect for the wisdom and discernment of the chief. Ahia, who had been watching the interaction with wide eyes, let out a quiet sigh. She stepped forward, moving toward her father, her expression filled with emotion. The tribe members surrounded her, checking her for signs of harm, speaking softly in their language, and offering words of comfort. John watched from a respectful distance, understanding that this was their moment, their reunion, and that his role was complete. Despite the relief and joy of the reunion, there was still an unspoken bond between John and Ahia. She looked back at him several times, her eyes filled with gratitude, acknowledgement, and a quiet sadness. She had survived because of him, but now she would return to her people. John felt a mix of pride and melancholy. He had cared for her, guided her, and watched her grow stronger. Letting go was difficult, but he knew it was the right thing. The chief approached John once more, extending a hand in a gesture of respect. There was no hostility, no accusation, only acknowledgement. Through gestures and broken words, he conveyed his gratitude. John accepted the hand firmly, understanding that a bridge had been built between them. It was a bridge of trust, honor, and mutual respect, created through honesty, courage, and compassion. The tribe prepared to leave, and Ahia mounted her horse with the help of the chief. She turned back briefly, offering John a small, meaningful smile. It was a smile that carried countless emotions, thanks, respect, and recognition of the bond they had formed. John waved, his heart full, knowing that she would be safe and that her life had been changed by his actions. As the riders disappeared into the horizon, John stood at the edge of the clearing, looking out over the snow-covered plains. The wind carried with it the memory of the reunion, the chief's question, and the young woman who had survived the deadly cold. He felt a sense of fulfillment, tempered by the quiet realization that life on the plains was unpredictable, fragile, and full of moments that required courage, compassion, and integrity. John returned to the cabin, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. He had not only saved a life, but had also learned a profound lesson about trust, morality, and human connection. The chief's question lingered in his mind, a reminder that true kindness is measured not by outcomes but by intention. He understood that every act of compassion carries a weight beyond the immediate, shaping relationships, respect, and understanding between people, communities, and cultures. In the following days, John noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere on the ranch. The land, the animals, and even the winter seemed quieter, more reflective, as if acknowledging the extraordinary events that had taken place. He continued his daily routines, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and caring for the horses, but there was a new awareness in his actions. He moved with a quiet purpose, understanding that life's true value lies not only in survival, but also in the choices one makes when faced with others in need. Occasionally, he would think of Ahia, imagining her among her tribe, safe and respected. He hoped that she would carry forward the lessons of trust and courage they had shared. And though their paths were now separate, he knew that the bond they had formed would remain, a quiet thread connecting two lives across the vast, snow-covered plains. Through the winter and into the early days of spring, John Whitaker continued his life on the ranch with a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced the harshest elements, acted with integrity, and witnessed the profound impact of a single, selfless act. The experience had changed him, deepened his understanding of human nature, and reinforced the timeless truth that courage and kindness are forces capable of bridging even the widest gaps between people, cultures, and worlds. As the plains slowly awakened with the promise of spring, John looked out over the land, the memory of the chief's question still vivid. It was a reminder that life often presents challenges not only in survival but in character. And in answering that question honestly, he had discovered something deeper about himself, about human connection, and about the enduring power of compassion in a world that can be as harsh as it is beautiful. The story of John Whitaker and Ahia was now a quiet legend on the plains, a tale of survival, trust, and the transformative power of human kindness. And though the snow would eventually melt and the seasons would change, the lesson remained timeless. True courage is revealed not in the battles we fight, but in the hearts we choose to protect, the lives we choose to save, and the integrity with which we act, even when no one is watching. The days after the tribe's arrival were quiet, but John Whitaker could feel that something had shifted. The meeting with the chief and the safe return of Ahia to her people had left a mark, not just on him, but on the entire rhythm of the plains. He continued his daily routines on the ranch, but there was a deeper awareness in his thoughts. The chief's question lingered in his mind. Did you save her because you expected something, or because it was the right thing? It was a question that demanded reflection, one that revealed the true weight of human actions. John often found himself staring at the horizon during the early mornings, the pale sun reflecting off the snow, thinking about the tribe and their ways. He realized that while he had acted out of instinct and compassion, the chief's question had shown him the importance of intention. It was not enough to save a life. One had to act from a place of honesty, morality, and respect. That understanding stayed with him, shaping how he approached his work, his interactions with neighbors, and even the small decisions of everyday life. Meanwhile, Ahia's absence left a quiet void in the cabin. Though John had known she would eventually return to her people, he felt a subtle emptiness. She had grown strong and confident under his care, and their bond, though never spoken aloud, was undeniable. He remembered her first steps in the snow, her laughter, the way she had learned the routines of the ranch, and her determined spirit. Every memory was vivid, a reminder of the resilience of life and the importance of human connection. One day, several weeks after the reunion, a rider appeared on the horizon. John recognized the approach instantly. It was a messenger from the tribe. The man was careful and respectful, riding slowly and holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. As he reached the cabin, he dismounted and handed the bundle to John. There was a folded note, written in simple English and accompanied by small tokens, a carved feather, a strip of fabric, and a small wooden figure. John unfolded the note and read the words carefully. It was from the chief, a message of gratitude and respect. He expressed how deeply the tribe appreciated John's actions, how they recognized his honesty, and how his courage had not only saved Ahia's life but had also built trust between their people. The chief invited John to visit the tribe in the spring, to meet them fully, and to share stories of the land and their ways. The gesture filled John with pride, humility, and a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that the chief's question had opened a door, not just to trust, but to friendship and understanding between two worlds. As John held the tokens in his hands, he thought about Ahia and the transformation she had undergone. She had been weak and vulnerable when he first found her, but now she was strong, capable, and full of life. The chief's acknowledgement validated all the work John had done, but it also reminded him that true kindness does not seek reward. It creates its own ripple effects. Ahia's survival was the most important outcome, and everything else was secondary. In the following weeks, John continued his work with renewed energy. The ranch, still quiet under the grip of winter, seemed brighter in his eyes. Each animal, each fence repaired, each step across the plains felt more purposeful. He often thought about the lessons he had learned from Ahia and the tribe: patience, observation, respect, and the importance of understanding others before passing judgment. The winter, once harsh and lonely, now seemed like a teacher, guiding him toward wisdom through experience and reflection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, John found himself at the cabin door, looking out over the snow-covered plains. He thought about the future, about the tribe, Ahia, and the bonds that had been formed. He realized that the chief's question was not just about a single act of kindness. It was about the choices people make every day. It was about how they respond to need, fear, and uncertainty, and how those responses define character, build trust, and shape relationships. The next day, John decided to prepare a small gift for the tribe, a gesture of goodwill to accompany the tokens they had sent him. He carefully carved a piece of wood into the shape of a horse, painting it with simple designs that reflected the land he loved and the animals he cared for. He wrapped it in cloth, much like the tribe had done, and attached a note expressing his gratitude for their trust, his respect for their culture, and his hope for future friendship. It was a small act, but one that carried deep meaning. Spring began to approach, and with it came the promise of renewal. The snow slowly melted, revealing the first signs of green on the plains. Birds returned, their songs filling the air, and the creek that had been frozen all winter began to flow again. John watched the changes with a sense of wonder. Life, he realized, was resilient. Even after the harshest winter, even after moments of danger and uncertainty, life could grow, flourish, and create beauty. As the days grew warmer, John received another message from the tribe. The chief invited him to visit their village, to meet the elders, and to share his knowledge of the land and animals. John accepted with humility and anticipation. He understood that this was an opportunity, not only to honor the bond formed with Ahia, but also to strengthen the relationship between two communities that had once been wary of each other. The day of his visit arrived, and John set out early, riding across the plains with careful attention to the trail. The landscape had transformed from a frozen expanse into a vibrant panorama of life. The snow had melted into rivulets and patches of green, and the animals he passed seemed to sense his purpose. John felt a deep connection to the land, a reminder that he was part of something larger than himself, a web of life, community, and shared responsibility. When he reached the village, he was greeted warmly by the tribe. The chief welcomed him personally, acknowledging his courage, honesty, and dedication to Ahia's survival. John met the elders, listened to their stories, and shared his own experiences on the ranch. The exchange was rich, full of learning, laughter, and respect. John realized that the chief's question had not only tested him, but had also opened a path to understanding, friendship, and mutual growth. During his visit, John had the chance to see Ahia thriving among her people. She moved confidently, speaking and laughing, her energy full of life. The bond they had shared was evident in the way she glanced at him, offering a smile that carried memory, gratitude, and trust. John felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that his actions had made a lasting difference. Over the next few days, John learned more about the tribe's customs, traditions, and way of life. He observed how they worked together, cared for one another, and respected the land. The experience deepened his understanding of human connection and highlighted the universal values of kindness, courage, and integrity. He realized that despite cultural differences, the principles that guide human behavior, honesty, empathy, and compassion, are universal. When it was time to leave, John felt a mixture of pride, humility, and contentment. He had not only saved a life, but had also built a bridge between two communities. The chief's question had changed everything, not only for Ahia, but also for John and the tribe. It had transformed fear and uncertainty into trust and respect, demonstrating the power of intention, honesty, and human kindness. As John rode back to his ranch, the wind blowing through his hair and the plains stretching endlessly before him, he reflected on the journey. The harsh winter, the rescue, the bond with Ahia, and the interactions with her tribe had all taught him profound lessons. He understood now that true courage is not only in facing physical challenges, but in acting with integrity, even when no one is watching. True compassion is not measured by reward but by the choice to do what is right. Back at the ranch, John continued his work with renewed energy and purpose. He shared the lessons he had learned with neighbors and visitors, always emphasizing the importance of empathy, understanding, and moral courage. The experience had changed him, deepened his awareness, and strengthened his connection to both the land and the people around him. And though the winter had passed and the snow had melted, the memory of Ahia, the chief's question, and the bond they had formed remained vivid. It was a quiet reminder that even small acts of kindness can ripple outward, transforming lives, building trust, and creating a world where compassion and courage guide human action. The story of John Whitaker and Ahia became a quiet legend in the region, a tale told by neighbors, travelers, and the tribe alike. It was a story of survival, trust, and the transformative power of integrity. And though the plains would continue to change with the seasons, the lessons learned during that harsh winter would remain timeless. That courage, honesty, and kindness have the power to bridge worlds, heal hearts, and change lives forever. Spring had fully arrived on the plains, and with it came a sense of renewal. The snow had melted into gentle streams, the grass was beginning to grow, and the animals on John Whitaker's ranch moved with energy and ease. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers that were just beginning to bloom. The long winter, which had been so harsh and unforgiving, now felt like a distant memory. Yet, its lessons remained deeply rooted in John's mind, shaping the way he approached every task, every moment, and every relationship. John continued his work on the ranch with steady hands and a clear mind. Feeding the cattle, checking fences, and caring for the horses had always been part of his daily routine, but now he carried with him a quiet awareness that life could change in an instant. The memory of Ahia and the dangerous cold that had nearly claimed her life was never far from his thoughts. He often found himself pausing to reflect on how a single act of kindness could ripple through time, affecting not just one life, but many others in ways that were impossible to predict. Even though Ahia had returned to her people, her presence lingered in subtle ways. The small lessons she had learned from him, the quiet bond they had shared, and the courage she had shown during her time on the ranch had left an imprint on John's heart. He could still remember the first time she had stood upright in the snow, the way her eyes had brightened with understanding, and the small smile that had broken through her exhaustion. Those memories reminded him that life, even in its harshest forms, could be strengthened by compassion and human connection. The chief's question, asked so many weeks earlier, continued to echo in John's thoughts. Did you save her because you expected something, or because it was the right thing? He realized that the question had not only been a test, but also a lesson in morality and integrity. Acting with honesty without expecting reward had opened doors that John could never have imagined. It had led to trust, friendship, and understanding between himself and the Apache tribe. It had also deepened his understanding of what it meant to be a responsible, compassionate human being. One afternoon, as John repaired a fence along the northern boundary of his ranch, he noticed a group of riders approaching from the horizon. His heart quickened with anticipation, and he felt a mixture of curiosity and excitement. As the riders drew closer, he recognized familiar faces: the chief, Ahia, and several members of the tribe. They had come to visit, not out of urgency or need, but to share a moment of connection, to bridge the distance that had grown since Ahia's return. When they arrived at the cabin, the chief greeted John warmly, with a firm handshake and a nod of respect. Ahia dismounted and ran toward him, her laughter ringing like music across the plains. She threw her arms around him in a hug, a gesture filled with gratitude, affection, and recognition of the bond they had shared. John felt a surge of joy, realizing that this reunion was not only a celebration of survival, but also a testament to the enduring power of trust and kindness. The chief spoke with John at length, sharing stories of how the tribe had cared for Ahia after her return. He explained how they had been inspired by John's actions, how the trust he had shown had encouraged them to consider new ways of approaching their relationships with settlers on the plains. The chief's words were filled with respect, and John listened attentively, understanding that this was more than mere gratitude. It was an acknowledgement of shared humanity. Over the next several days, John spent time with the tribe, learning more about their customs, traditions, and daily life. He observed their ceremonies, their methods of working together, and the deep respect they held for the land and its resources. The experience was enlightening, expanding his perspective and deepening his appreciation for a culture that had survived for generations through resilience, wisdom, and community. Ahia served as a bridge between John and her people, translating gestures, sharing stories, and guiding him through the ways of the tribe. Her confidence and strength were evident, and John felt immense pride in the person she had become. During these visits, John and Ahia often walked together along the edges of the plains, speaking in gestures and simple words, sharing thoughts, memories, and observations about the land they both loved. The conversations, though limited by language, were rich with meaning. They talked about survival, trust, and the importance of understanding one another. John realized that the lessons he had learned from her, and from the experience of saving her life, were now guiding his interactions with everyone around him. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, John and the chief sat together by a small fire outside the village. The chief spoke quietly about the importance of integrity, compassion, and courage. He explained that the question he had asked weeks ago was meant not only for John, but for everyone who had the power to act in critical moments. It was a reminder that the choices people make define them more than their words or reputation. John listened carefully, feeling the weight and wisdom of the chief's perspective. The bond between John and the tribe grew stronger with each visit. He was invited to participate in community activities, to share his knowledge of ranching and livestock care, and to learn traditional skills in return. The exchange of knowledge and culture created a mutual respect that transcended the initial circumstances of Ahia's rescue. John realized that human connection could flourish even after moments of fear, danger, or uncertainty. It required honesty, respect, and the courage to act without expectation. As the weeks passed, John reflected on the changes within himself. The winter rescue, the bond with Ahia, and the interactions with her tribe had all shaped his character. He felt a deepened sense of empathy, a heightened awareness of the fragility of life, and a renewed commitment to act with integrity. He also understood that true heroism was not in grand gestures or fame, but in the quiet, consistent acts of kindness that make a real difference in the lives of others. Ahia, now fully integrated back into her tribe, still maintained a connection with John. She visited the ranch frequently, sharing news of her people, recounting stories, and helping him with the work when she could. Their friendship had become a source of joy, learning, and mutual respect. John admired her resilience and courage, understanding that the life-saving act he had taken for granted had become transformative for both of them. The ranch itself seemed to come alive with the change in seasons and in John's outlook. The animals thrived in the warmer weather, the fields grew greener, and the days lengthened with the promise of summer. John moved with a sense of purpose, motivated not only by his work, but by the knowledge that every life he touched had potential to grow, flourish, and create lasting bonds. He thought often about the chief's question and how it had changed the course of events, bringing clarity, trust, and a new perspective on life. One day, as he walked along the edge of the ranch, John encountered a group of travelers passing through the plains. He shared the story of Ahia, her rescue, and the lessons learned about courage, integrity, and compassion. The travelers listened intently, inspired by the simple yet profound acts that had led to trust and understanding between John and the tribe. The story spread quietly among neighbors and visitors, becoming a tale of hope, resilience, and human connection. John also spent time teaching younger members of the community about the importance of empathy and moral courage. He emphasized that every choice, no matter how small, has the potential to create ripples that can change lives. He spoke about Ahia's survival, the chief's question, and the lessons of winter, using the story to inspire others to act with honesty, kindness, and awareness. The impact was subtle but profound, fostering a sense of shared responsibility and respect among the people around him. As summer approached, John reflected on the journey from that bitter winter day when he had first found Ahia in the snow. The harsh cold, the danger, and the uncertainty had tested his courage and determination. But in acting with compassion, patience, and honesty, he had not only saved a life but had built bridges of trust, understanding, and friendship. He realized that true heroism lies in small, deliberate choices, and that integrity is often measured in the quiet moments when no one is watching. The bond between John and Ahia, though rooted in necessity and survival, had grown into a lasting friendship. They continued to support one another, learning from each other, and sharing experiences across the boundaries of culture, language, and background. The tribe, too, recognized John's sincerity and welcomed him as a friend and ally, deepening the connection between their communities. In the quiet evenings, as John watched the sun set over the plains, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had faced the harshest challenges of winter, acted with courage and integrity, and witnessed the transformative power of human kindness. The experience had changed him, strengthened his character, and left an indelible mark on his life. The story of John Whitaker and Ahia became a lasting memory, told among neighbors, visitors, and the tribe alike. It was a story of survival, trust, moral courage, and the extraordinary impact of simple, selfless acts. And though the seasons would continue to change, and the plains would once again face harsh winters, the lessons of that winter, the chief's question, Ahia's courage, and John's integrity, would remain timeless. John Whitaker continued his life on the ranch with a renewed sense of purpose, carrying the wisdom and lessons of that winter in his heart. He had learned that compassion, honesty, and courage are not measured by reward, fame, or recognition, but by the lives they touch, the trust they build, and the lasting impact they leave on the world. The plains, the animals, and the people he encountered all bore witness to the quiet power of integrity and human kindness. And as the sun set on the vast, open landscape, John knew that life, fragile, unpredictable, and often harsh, could be transformed by a single, selfless act. He had saved a life, gained a friend, and created a bridge of trust and understanding that would endure across generations. It was a story not just of survival, but of humanity, courage, and the enduring power of doing what is right.